Hey guys, welcome to Sonic Discovery. I am your host, David Correa. On this episode, we'll be talking about music from Car Seat Headrest, Brandi Carlile, and a remix album for Ryuichi Sakamoto. Welcome to the episode. Thank you so much for clicking play. Before we go into the reviews, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the show. So there's tons of music that comes out every Friday, and I know that it's overwhelming at times. So what I do is I go through all the music that I listen to, and I listen to a lot, basically let you know what I think. So all you really got to do is go through these reviews, take a listen to what I have to say, and then you make your own opinion. Check it out or not. The first album we have up for review is the new album. Well, actually, I don't know if I'd call it a new album, but this is a new release from Car Seat Headrest. This is called Twin Fantasy. The reason why I was a little confused as to how to present this is because this is actually the reworking of an album that was released back in 2011. Will Toledo, who is the main guy behind the group, he released that album on Bandcamp and got a lot of attention for it. And at the time, that was his 6th album. And now this is album number 11. So he's produced a lot of stuff. That album wasn't really up to par for him. Maybe he didn't have the technology available to him or the budget available to him to what he had in his mind. Something obviously that was very large and expansive. So now he had a chance to revisit those songs and present them in a more polished way. I became familiar with Car Seat Headrest from their last album, 2016's Teen of Denial, which is a phenomenal record. If you like rock music, you should definitely check it out. I believe at the time that was probably my 5th or so. It was in my top 5. I really, really liked it, and I'm sure you will too. And there's similarities between the two because they're very long. That one was 70 minutes, and this one's 71. So they're very large and expansive. Some of these tracks go on for very long. I think the longest track on here is 16 minutes. So you're in for a lot of music, but it's really high quality. The instrumentation on here is great. The lyrics here, sometimes he's direct, sometimes not so much. A little cryptic on the lyrics. But there are times here where he'll occasionally bring back a phrase that he said in a song earlier. So it really gives you an idea that this project is a large collection that is really meant to be a full album concept. The opening track here, My Boy, Twin Fantasy, really serves as the introduction to the album. This one starts off a little calmer, and then it definitely starts going around verse number 3. Lyrically here, I'm not really sure what he's talking about. He might be alluding to the fact that he doesn't get to hang out with his boys too often anymore, but again, it wasn't too clear to me. Next, we have Beach Life in Death, which is a sprawling 13-minute track that is split into 3 different sections. The first section here has a lot of energy, and around the 5-minute mark, it switches to the second one, which has some slower moments, and it grows to have a really grand sound. And then when we get to section 3, that's where the tempo picks up again, and we end with more high energy. Lyrically on this song, it's all over the place. So you give it a listen and let me know what you think it's about. Next, we have the short acoustic track, Stop Smoking, We Love You. And this one is very direct. Basically, stop smoking because we love you and we don't want you to die. Next, we have the catchy Nervous Young Inhumans, which has this little sound in it that's kind of a little earworm. I'm not quite sure what it is. It might be a synth or a guitar that creates it, but it starts it off and it's repeated throughout, and it really gets stuck in your ear. The first half here is a little bit more straightforward, as a couple's talking about the things that they swore they would never do to each other, but yet they still end up falling into that trap. The The second half here is spoken word, and you find that a lot throughout this album. The next track, Bodies, is probably the catchiest song on this album. It has nice shifts in the song where it sometimes gets really big and has sing-along moments. Here he talks about admiring someone else's body, but yet he doesn't seem too comfortable handling his own. Cute Thing is another really catchy song. This one has some little sections that I believe adds the mandolin, which I really enjoyed, and the rest of it turns the volume up all the way to 11. Here he talks about how he likes somebody, but he doesn't want to come on too strong. This is the track where we get an awesome guitar solo. High to Death is a much calmer moment on the album, and we get a lot of nice clarity from the guitar. This ends with a recording of a girl explaining a bit about her art. Famous Prophet Stars is a doozy. This is the one that's 16 minutes long. It starts off with a soloed bass and eventually grows to have these pretty long jams, and then it kind of mellows out again as it has this nice interplay between the guitars, and then there it goes again, building back up. After a while, it goes down to a piano-driven section, and then in the last 3 minutes, you are just, bam, just hits you over the head. It explodes with energy. Then finally, it closes out with Twin Fantasy, Those Boys, which starts off with an organ and a beat, and, eventually gets going, but doesn't really get to the heights of those previous songs. Overall, I really enjoyed this album. Musically, it's great, it's big, ambitious, covers a lot of sound. Lyrically, a little cryptic here, but I like the music so much that I kind of gave it a pass. This is going to get a score of an 8.5 from me, so I highly recommend you go check this out. Next up on the show, we have the 6th album from Brandi Carlile. This is called By the Way, I Forgive You. Now, Brandi is from Washington State, and she has more of a rootsy folk rock sound. Like I mentioned, this is her 6th album, but it's the first one for me. Her last was 2015's The Firecracker's Daughter, and I didn't really get around to listening to that, although I did find it on a lot of those lists of, things I may have just overlooked. I'm a big fan of this style of music, so I really enjoyed this release. Lyrically here, she tells a lot of great stories, so if you admire country music for its storytelling, you're definitely going to like this. The album opens up nicely with Every Time I Hear That Song. This has a really beautiful sound and really rich vocals, especially when you get the backgrounds coming in on the chorus. Here she talks about a former relationship, and instead of looking back in anger, she kind of looks back with forgiveness. And, occasionally that relationship comes back into her mind when she hears a certain song. The Joke is one of the singles released from this album, and this one also has a folk rock sound, and we get some nice strings on the chorus as well. This song is a bit more uplifting, talking about, ignoring what other people say and not really letting it get you down, because in the end, you'll be the last one laughing. Vocally here, she reminded me of Chrissie Hynde from The Pretenders, and there's at least 2 other moments where this happens. Hold Out Your Hand was another favorite of mine. Here, the verses are delivered at a very rapid pace, and then it suddenly stops as we get to a chorus that has a much more uplifting sound. This song is about overcoming different adversities. The Mother is a nice acoustic song that talks about the hardships and rewards that come from motherhood. Whatever You Do is also a soft acoustic track with strings that are added here, and but this one, towards the end, her voice starts going a little crazy. This one speaks about how much harder life can be when you choose to love someone that's a little difficult. Sugartooth is another personal favorite, as she tells a story of a man that hasn't had an easy life. He's had a bad addiction to drugs, and he tries to overcome it, but life just keeps weighing him down, and in the end, he just decides it's too much, so he ends his life. Most of all is a great acoustic track in which she's talking about her parents and how much she misses them. But when she starts looking closely at herself, she sees a bunch of their traits. Harder to Forgive gives us a similar folk rock sound, as it does climb to a really big finish. Here she expresses the ups and downs of life. And the album closes with Party of One, a piano ballad that expresses the pain and exhaustion that can come from living and loving. Vocally, when it starts, she reminds me a lot of Joni Mitchell, but as it goes on, her voice gets a lot more expressive. Overall, like I mentioned, I was a big fan of this album. I gave it a score of an 8 out of 10. So if you like rootsy Americana, then I highly recommend you check this out. The last album up for review is a Sync Remodel, which is actually a retooling of an album by Ryuichi Sakamoto. The last album he released was 2017's Async, and here we have a bunch of different artists remixing and remodeling these songs and presenting them in a new way. I'm not familiar with that album. I didn't get a chance to listen to it, but it was on a lot of best year-end lists. So if you like ambient music, you might want to go check that out. As for this one, I checked it out just because I really liked a lot of the artists that did remixes on these songs. Before we get into the album, let me give you just a little bit of backstory on Sakamoto's career. He's a Japanese artist that got his start in the 70s. He was a member of a group called Yellow Machine Orchestra, and he was pivotal in exposing that country to techno and synth pop and electronic music in general. He's had a long, prolific career, released many albums after that in the late 70s and on, and he's a producer, a composer, an actor at times as well. First up, we have Andata, which is remixed by Unorthodox Point Never, who, in my mind, is one of the most exciting electronic artists out there today. This is a mostly calming track, although there are moments where he's able to impose his sound as you have these waves kind of coming over the track. Next, we get the same track, Andata, but now it's remixed by the Canadian synth pop group Electric Youth. This one has the same melodic phrase going on, but this time we have a really catchy beat over it. Next we have Disintegration, which is remixed by a German electronic musician, Alva Noto. There's a really nice eeriness to this track with this pulsating beat and these little electric spark sounds I really enjoyed. Next we have the title track, Async, and this remix is handled by Venezuelan artist Arca, and I'm a big fan of him, and you can hear his sound imprinted all over this track. Next we have Full Moon, which is remixed by Motion Graphics. Here it sounds like the song is crawling, and occasionally we get some bursts of synths and different effects. Next we have Solari, that is remixed by Austrian composer Vanez. And on this one, we have gentle synth pads play as we get occasional sparks playing over it. Next we have the same track, but now it's reworked by Icelandic composer Jóhann Jóhannsson. Sadly, we just lost Johann probably about 2-3 weeks ago, and I was just becoming familiar with him. I found out that he did the scores to Sicario and Arrival, and I remember watching those movies and really being astounded by the score. This track sounds like it would fit perfectly within his own work. Next we have Zur, which is worked on by Yez Tumor. Now, I don't know much about this artist, but this was probably one of my favorites on this album. This one starts off with some nice calming moments, but then gets some occasional burst of cymbals and horns coming in. And then there's this really cool beat that happens halfway through the track. Full Moon is reworked by the group Survive, and you'll know them because they did the soundtrack to Stranger Things. This is very similar to their soundtrack work, where sometimes it's a bit more calming and others it's a bit more explosive. Next, we get another reworking of Zur, but this one is done by Japanese artist Cornelius. The synths on here get really interesting as they come in as waves, and then we occasionally hear some ripples and a sudden vacuum of sound. And the last track, Life Life, is reworked by British artist Andy Stott. Here we get some great synth lines, some percussion that sounds like mallets, and really great reverb on that snare. Overall, I was pleased with this album. It was a nice listen, and it's a little different just because I didn't listen to the original work, so I don't know how these remixes really compare to the original tracks. At least for my sake, this is gonna score somewhere between a 7 or 8 out of 10, so let's just go with a 7.5. If you like some electronic music that is a bit more ambient and calming, then I recommend you check this out. Well guys, there you go. 3 more albums for you to potentially check out. If you like the reviews or you have any suggestions for things you want me to listen to, make sure to leave those as a comment at the bottom. And while you're there, go ahead and hit the like button or subscribe as well. On the next one, we'll be talking about music from Aunt, US Girls, and Nipsey Hussle.